Hi, I'm Aisher. In this video, we're going to look at sidechain compression in Cubase. Now, for this, we're going to use compression in a slightly different way to the way in which you would normally use it if you're just processing maybe a drum sound or want to apply dynamic compression to one particular element of a mix. We're using so-called sidechain mode, which means that you can actually feed audio from another source into the compressor, which is running across a particular sound. So if we have a look in here, I can actually explain what's going on. So we have a pad sound, and you can hear it's just a held pad. You can look at the MIDI notes here. It's just a synth sound being held, and I'm looping it around. I've also got a drum sound. Let's change the level of that in the mixer a little bit. Let's bring the pad up a bit. And you can see I've got a compressor applied across this. Now, if I just go in and solo that pad and have a listen to this, you can see with I was really squeezing the compression there. And what it's doing at the moment is compressing the pad based on the audio input from the pad. So if the pad level is really loud, it will squeeze the audio down a little bit based on the various settings with the compressor. Now, because it's held, it actually acts like a volume control. What I want to do now is actually control the amount of dynamic change, the change in the output level, not by the input of the pad itself, but from something else. So in fact, it's a bit like feeding, say, another audio source into the compressor. So the compressor will then have two audio inputs. It will have the main input where you get the sound to be processed, and you'll get a secondary audio input, which is called the sidechain, which is the sound that will do the processing and will control the processing element of the mix, of the dynamics of the compressor. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to enable the sidechain button. I'm going to click on this little triangle. I'm going to do set up sidechain input and add sidechain input. And I'm going to choose Groove Agent. If I click on that, it automatically sets up Groove Agent to feed into the sidechain of the compressor. In fact, what it does, it sets up an audio send here on the Groove Agent channel, and it feeds that into the processing part, the thing that decides on what the dynamic, that actually looks at the dynamic level, and actually uses that to determine the final output level of the compressor. Now, let's play it. I'm going to unsolo those elements. Let's play what we can hear at the moment. So at the moment, we've got the pad, and we've got a kick drum. So in other words, it's as it was before. As I bring the threshold down, now the kick drum is the thing that actually is feeding into this sidechain. When the sidechain level goes above this minus 30 dB here, it will then use that to feed into the attenuator, the amplifier part of the compressor, and then start to change the level of the pad. As I bring that down, you can see how what's going on is every time the kick hits, it pushes in, it actually pushes the pad level down. So it ducks the pad level down. Now, you might be familiar with this from, for example, on radio, when a radio presenter starts talking and the music is automatically ducked down. And that actually is a similar kind of process. In that case, the vocal is feeding into the sidechain of a compressor, and the compressor is then working on the music output from the track they're actually playing, and it pushes the level down. But you can use sidechain in lots of interesting creative ways, and the sidechain applies to compressors and gates and all kinds of other things, but really it's most commonly found, particularly electronic styles. You really hear it, it can quite dominate on some tracks when it's used with, for example, a synth element, a sustaining synth element, and it's being fed by the kick drum, and it adds that real rhythmic, interesting rhythmic feel. Now, of course, we can go into more detail with this if we want to. We could play around with the timing characteristics of it. So how quickly it recovers afterwards is going to be based on the release time, and how quickly it kicks in with the compression is going to be based on the attack time. But largely speaking, when you're dealing with a kick drum, using sidechain compression with a pad or something, you want a fast attack, you want a moderately fast release time, and that will actually deliver the result perhaps you're most familiar with. And you can tweak the threshold to get more or less. In fact, you find at lower threshold settings, it just nudges it down, actually clears space for the kick drum, which actually is a very, very useful mix effect. You're not getting that obvious pumping, you're just getting the level of the pad being pushed away, and it could be other elements as well. It's being pushed away slightly to make room for the kick drum. In fact, that can actually make more room in your mix. If you're thinking about trying to make a mix louder, you're freeing up a little space, the pad is being pushed down, it makes more room for the kick drum, which actually means there's more available headroom to actually maybe at a later stage apply more compression across the whole mix or more limiting. It actually squeezes out more space in the mix, and you can use sidechain compression to compress pretty much anything. It doesn't just have to be pads. So there we are, you can hear it there doing its thing. So you can see sidechain compression, although it's become known as its own kind of separate entity, really it's just a variation on compression. It's about feeding the compressor, the dynamic processor, with two different audio sources. You've got the audio source, which is running through the compressor and is actually going to be compressed, where the dynamics will actually change. And then you get a secondary signal feeding in from somewhere else that you determine, which feeds into the detector part of the compressor. In other words, the thing that decides how much of that gain change is going to happen. And so you have your pad, and in this case you have your pad and your kick, and the kick is squashing down, is pushing down the output level of that pad.